Imagine an absolute deafening silence that lasted for decades. It was an institutional silence, a meticulously constructed architecture of silence built around one of humanity's most fundamental mysteries, unidentified anomalous phenomena, UFOs. For over 70 years, the official position was as monolithic as granite: swamp gas, weather balloons, optical illusions, radar glitches, and of course, the favorite explanation for everything inexplicable: mass hysteria. The system, that impersonal, all-encompassing mechanism of government agencies, military branches, and the scientific establishment, spoke with one voice. There's nothing there. Nothing to see here. Move along. And then, the silence was broken. In the summer of 2023, the unthinkable happened. The wall of silence didn't just crack. It was blown apart from the inside. In a hearing room of the United States Congress, under the glare of dozens of cameras, a former intelligence officer named David Grusch, a man with an impeccable service record, spoke words that should have changed the world forever. He spoke of a multi-decade, deeply classified program to recover and study wreckage from craft of non-human origin. He spoke of non-human biologics, discovered at crash sites. He spoke under oath. This was not some fringe researcher at a questionable conference. This was an insider, a part of the very system that had suddenly decided to speak against itself. What followed was an information cascade. The Pentagon stopped denying the authenticity of videos taken by Navy pilots. The head of ARO, the Anomaly Resolution Office, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, began giving briefings, acknowledging hundreds of cases that defied explanation. Suddenly, after decades of ridicule and denial, the topic of UAPs became legitimate. The official version we were offered was simple, even noble. The government, under public pressure and thanks to brave whistleblowers, was finally becoming more transparent. The era of cover-ups was over. The era of disclosure was beginning. It sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Almost too good to be true. Because the real drama of information always unfolds, not in what is said, but in what is left unsaid. And the one question no one dared to ask in those days was not, what did they tell us? But why did they start talking right now? What changed? What event, so monumental and unavoidable, could force the system to voluntarily relinquish its most valuable asset? Control of the narrative? Most were too captivated by the spectacle itself to notice the stage dressing. But if you took a step back, if you looked not at the stage but at the starry sky behind it, you could see something strange. Something moving in deep space. Something whose trajectory had suspiciously altered just weeks before the first insider decided to testify. And this is where our story begins. Because the congressional hearings were not the climax. They were the prelude. The first act of a carefully orchestrated protocol, launched not by a desire to tell the truth, but by a desperate need to prevent global panic. They didn't speak because they wanted to. They spoke because they no longer had a choice. Because they knew 3I Atlas was coming. To understand the scale of what's happening, we need to go back a few months, into the cold silence of space. In 2022, while the world was consumed with earthly problems, an automated sky survey at the Vera C. Rubin Observatory in Chile detected a new object. This is a routine event. These systems find thousands of asteroids and comets every year. The object was given the temporary designation C2022F4, and then, after its interstellar origin was confirmed, it received its official name, 3 Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar object discovered by humanity. The first was Oumuamua, the cigar-shaped wanderer that shot through our system, leaving more questions than answers. The second was Comet 2I Borisov, which behaved more predictably. 3I Atlas, or simply Atlas, initially seemed like something in between. Its orbit was clearly hyperbolic, with an eccentricity far greater than 1, proving irrefutably that it came from the depths of the galaxy and, after passing our sun, would return to them forever. Initial observations showed it was a large object, perhaps a cometary nucleus several dozen kilometers in diameter. It was faint, cold, and seemed unremarkable, except for its status as a guest from another star system. But the longer astronomers watched Atlas, the more anomalies piled up in the data. The first anomaly was its spectral analysis. When light from a distant star reflects off an object's surface, it carries information about its chemical composition. The spectroscopy of Atlas showed the presence of silicates, water ice, and frozen gases, a perfectly expected set for a comet. But there was something else. Inexplicably high peaks of rhenium and osmium, two of the densest and most refractory metals in the universe. These elements are extremely rare, even in the cores of planets. To find them in such concentrations on the surface of an icy comet was strange. Official science, as always, found a convenient explanation. A hypothesis was put forward that Atlas could have formed near a supernova, whose explosion enriched the surrounding space with heavy elements. Theoretically possible, but extremely unlikely. This was the first blind spot, the first inconvenient detail that the system chose to neatly frame as an acceptable exoticism. But then Atlas did something that could no longer be dismissed as an exotic origin. As comets approach the sun, they begin to heat up. The ice on their surface turns directly into gas, bypassing the liquid phase, a process called sublimation. The erupting jets of gas and dust create a coma and a tail, and also act as miniature rocket engines, causing what's known as non-gravitational acceleration. This effect is well studied and predictable. Astronomers expected Atlas, like any comet, to begin showing this activity when it crossed the frost line, roughly at the distance of Jupiter's orbit. But Atlas remained silent. It continued its motion, obeying only the laws of celestial mechanics. No outgassing, no jets, no acceleration. It was as inert as a rock. And here, in this silence, the second, even more disturbing anomaly was born. And then, on one specific day, everything changed. On May 23rd, 2023, at 3 hours and 11 minutes Coordinated Universal Time, all major flight control centers and astronomical observatories tracking near-Earth objects received an automated alert. All their models predicting the trajectory of Atlas suddenly reported a colossal error. The object, which until then had moved with perfect predictability, had performed a maneuver. It wasn't the gentle acceleration from sublimation. It was a sharp, short, almost instantaneous impulse that changed its velocity vector. Slightly, by fractions of a degree. But on the scale of the solar system, it was enough to completely alter its future. The new trajectory was shocking. Atlas was no longer leaving the solar system after its flyby of the sun. It was entering a stable, nearly circular orbit in the vicinity of the asteroid belt. It was staying. And now, connect the two events. May 23rd, 2023. The interstellar object Atlas inexplicably changes its trajectory, deciding to stay in our system. And just 2 weeks later, in early June, the first information about upcoming congressional hearings with a high-ranking intelligence community whistleblower leaks to the press. A few weeks after that, David Grusch gives his sensational testimony. A coincidence? Or choreography? The system wants us to believe in coincidences. In the sudden awakening of conscience in dozens of officials and military officers who had been silent for decades. In the sudden desire for transparency from a structure whose very existence is based on secrecy. And all this against the backdrop of the most anomalous astronomical event since Oumuamua. But what if it's not a coincidence? What if the maneuver of Atlas was the trigger? What if on that day, May 23rd, At some top-secret meeting deep within the Pentagon, a decision was made. We can't deny it anymore. It's here. It's staying. Activate the protocol. A protocol to prevent global shock. A protocol whose first stage was distraction. The world's gaze had to be directed elsewhere. Everyone had to be talking about the past, about crashed saucers in Roswell, about encounters with gray aliens, about old dusty files from the 50s. A grand spectacle of disclosure had to be launched to hide the fact that the real disclosure was just now approaching. And while all of us, holding our breath, listened to tales of the past, the present, vast, cold, and utterly non-human, continued on its path to a new orbit. They talk about non-human biologics, showing us blurry photos and hinting at anthropomorphic beings. This is psychological conditioning. They are creating an image in our minds, an anchor, so that when Atlas arrives, not a humanoid ship, but a gigantic, possibly living crystal the size of a small city, composed of impossible alloys and organic molecules, our brains can at least try to process it, so that the shock level is not 100%, but maybe 90%. The hearings in Congress are not an act of transparency. They are an act of desperation. This is the largest psychological operation in human history, a smokescreen woven from half-truths to conceal one monumental, terrifying truth. We are no longer alone in our solar system, and our guest has decided to stay. To find the first crack in the monolithic wall of the official story, you didn't need to hack secret servers or recruit insiders. You just had to do what the system never expects us to do. Listen carefully, and then verify. When news of 3I Atlas's maneuver leaked beyond the small circle of specialists, the panic was brief. The system worked flawlessly, like a well-oiled machine for suppressing informational anomalies. Within 48 hours, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, published an official press release. Its tone was deliberately calm, almost academic. It was designed not so much to explain as to reassure, to extinguish the fire of curiosity before it could erupt into a blaze of paranoia. The idea they proposed was elegant in its scientific complexity. It was called cascading asymmetric outgassing of supervolatiles. Before you dismiss it as nonsense, let's break it down. This is a classic tactic of the system. Use terminology so complex that any non-specialist feels incompetent and simply accepts it on faith. But we won't. We'll dive into this theory to understand just how fragile it is. The official version went like this. The classic model of a comet, proposed back in the mid-20th century by Fred Whipple, is a dirty snowball, a mixture of water ice, dust, and rock. As it approaches the sun, the water ice sublimates, creating a coma and a tail. This process is fairly slow and predictable. However, as the JPL scientists explained, interstellar objects, formed in much colder and more exotic conditions, might have a different composition. Pockets of so-called supervolatiles could be hidden in their nuclei beneath the surface. This isn't just water ice. It's frozen nitrogen, carbon monoxide, methane, substances that turn into gas at much lower temperatures than water. The theory proposed that solar heat, slowly penetrating the core of Atlas, reached one such large, hidden pocket. This caused an explosive, almost instantaneous sublimation of a gigantic volume of carbon monoxide. Imagine an underwater cave into which magma suddenly erupts. The water instantly turns to steam, causing a colossal explosion. Here, according to NASA, something similar happened, only in a vacuum and at ultra-low temperatures. A powerful jet of gas, erupting from a single point on the surface, acted like a giant rocket engine, giving the object that short, sharp impulse that changed its trajectory. The cascading part of the theory explained why it happened so suddenly. One ruptured pocket could destabilize adjacent ones, causing a chain reaction. And asymmetric explained why it changed the orbit rather than just making the object spin. The jet didn't strike the center of mass. It was beautiful. It was scientific. It explained everything. The suddenness of the maneuver and the lack of prior outgassing. The comet was inactive because solar heat hadn't yet reached the surface water ice, but it had penetrated deep enough to rupture an anomalous pocket of carbon monoxide. This version was immediately picked up by all major scientific publications and news agencies. It became canon. The mystery was solved. Nothing to see here. Move along. But in an age of total digitalization and open data, the system has a fundamental vulnerability. It no longer holds a monopoly on telescopes. Scattered across the globe is a decentralized network of seekers, amateur astronomers, independent researchers, students, and enthusiasts armed with powerful equipment and, more importantly, a tireless skepticism. They are not bound by grants, career expectations, or the need to uphold the official narrative. Their only currency is truth, extracted from raw, unprocessed data. And they were the ones who found the first crack in the flawless facade of JPL's theory. The investigation began on a private forum dedicated to analyzing photometric data. Photometry is perhaps the simplest yet most powerful field of astronomy. It measures the brightness of objects, nothing more. But within these simple numbers lie entire stories. One of the forum's members, an astrophysics student from Germany with the handle Stellar Keeper, asked a simple, almost naive question. If a giant jet of gas and dust, sufficient to change its orbit, erupted from Atlas, shouldn't we have seen a flash? The logic was ironclad. When a comet ejects gas and dust, it creates a cloud around itself. A coma. This cloud reflects sunlight much more effectively than the solid nucleus. Therefore, any outgassing is accompanied by a sharp increase in the object's apparent brightness. The more powerful the outburst, the brighter the flash. And an outburst capable of altering the orbit of an object tens of kilometers in diameter would have to be not just powerful, it would have to be colossal. The brightness of Atlas should have skyrocketed by tens, if not hundreds of times. This event would have been visible even in medium-sized amateur telescopes. The data hunt began. Dozens of seekers around the world rushed to public archives. They downloaded terabytes of information from automated sky surveys like the Zwicky Transient Facility, Pan-STARRS, and of course Atlas, the object's namesake. They pieced together observations of Object 3I Atlas for the week before and the week after the May 23rd maneuver. They built what is called a light curve, a graph showing the change in an object's brightness over time. JPL's theory predicted a single, huge, sharp peak on this graph, perfectly coinciding in time with the moment of the trajectory change. The first results began to appear on the forum a few hours later. And they were strange. There was no peak, none at all. The graph was an almost perfectly flat line. Atlas had not brightened by a single magnitude. It remained as dim, cold, and inert as it was before the maneuver. At first, this was attributed to errors, to incomplete data. Perhaps the flare was too short and was simply missed. But then professionals with access to more precise instruments joined the analysis. A group of independent researchers from Spain requested photometric data from the TESS space telescope, which at that moment happened to be observing that patch of sky. TESS data is the gold standard. The telescope measures the brightness of stars with incredible precision to find exoplanets, and its verdict was final. At the moment of the maneuver, to the second, the brightness of 3I Atlas did not change, not by 1/100%. It was like hearing the sound of a cannon shot but seeing no smoke, no flame, no projectile. The effect, the change in orbit, was there. But the cause, according to NASA, a gigantic gas eruption, was completely absent. This wasn't just a crack, it was a breach. The theory of cascading asymmetric outgassing was dead. It was refuted in the most direct and undeniable way. The absence of a flare meant the absence of a significant gas and dust outburst. The absence of an outburst meant the absence of a natural rocket engine. And the absence of a natural engine meant that the impulse that changed the orbit of Atlas had another origin. And this is where it gets truly disturbing. It wasn't that the JPL scientists were wrong. Science is constantly wrong, proposing hypotheses, testing them, and discarding them. That's the normal process. What was disturbing was that the photometric data from tests and the ground-based surveys were available to NASA specialists the same day they were to the seekers on the forum. They saw the same flat graph. They knew there was no flare. They knew their theory didn't work even before they published their press release. And yet, they published it. This was no longer a mistake. It was a choice. It was an act of deliberate disinformation. They weren't trying to explain the anomaly. They were trying to bury it under a pile of scientific-sounding jargon. And at that moment, the entire picture begins to shift. The congressional hearings, David Grusch's statements, the sudden transparency of the Pentagon. All of this ceases to be a series of random events. It becomes part of the same strategy, a strategy of distraction and control. Imagine the situation. Internal analysts at the Pentagon and NASA are faced with a fact. An interstellar object the size of a mountain is headed our way and has just demonstrated the ability for controlled, exhaust-free propulsion. Their best scientific theory to explain it falls apart at the first check by independent observers. They realize that the truth about the nature of this maneuver will inevitably surface. What do? They can't hide astronomical data forever, but they can overload the information field. They can create a trickster event, something so loud, bright, and sensational that it will absorb all public and media attention. And what could be a better candidate for this role than the long-awaited disclosure of the UFO mystery? It's a brilliant move. They're not lying in the literal sense. They're just mixing truth with fiction, past with present, creating an informational noise so dense that the most important signal is drowned out. They're throwing us a bone, stories of crashes from 70 years ago, so we don't look at what's happening in our cosmic backyard right now. They knew their outgassing theory was a lie, but they didn't need it to withstand scientific scrutiny. They just needed it to hold for a few weeks, to fill the vacuum and give them time to deploy the next phase of the operation, the congressional hearings. The first crack was found, and it led not to solving the mystery of Atlas. It led to a much more terrifying realization. We are not just being kept in the dark. We are being actively manipulated. And the scale of this manipulation suggests that the truth they are so desperately trying to hide is far more shocking than we can possibly imagine. When one lie crumbles, its debris points to a larger lie. The official theory about the outgassing of 3I Atlas was not just a scientific error. It was a smokescreen, hastily deployed to hide an inconvenient fact, the absence of a flare. But this raised a new, much deeper question. If there was no gas eruption, then what gave the object its impulse? What invisible silent force could alter the orbit of a body with a mass of trillions of tons? To answer this question, we needed more than photometry from Earth. We needed a witness at the scene, eyes in deep space. And by an incredible coincidence, we had such eyes. Their name was Psyche. Launched in October of 2023, though in our timeline we'll go back to when it was already on its way. NASA's Psyche spacecraft is one of the most ambitious missions in the history of solar system exploration. Its target is the asteroid of the same name, 16 Psyche, a unique object in the main asteroid belt believed to be not just a rock, but the exposed iron core of a protoplanet that died at the dawn of our world's formation. Psyche is a geological time machine, flying towards the heart of a dead planet. For its journey, the spacecraft is equipped with the most advanced set of instruments, a high-resolution multispectral imager capable of seeing in different bands of light, a gamma-ray and neutron spectrometer to determine the surface's chemical composition, and, most importantly, a magnetometer designed to study the remnant magnetic field of the ancient core. But the main marvel of Psyche is its propulsion system. These are not chemical rockets. They are Hall-effect ion thrusters, a technology straight out of science fiction. They accelerate xenon ions to incredible speeds, creating a very weak but constant thrust. This allows the spacecraft to perform long, complex, and incredibly precise maneuvers in deep space. On May 23, 2023, at the very same day and hour, Psyche was approximately 80 million kilometers, about 50 million miles, away from 3I Atlas. On a cosmic scale, that's point-blank range. The craft wasn't deliberately flying towards Atlas. Their paths simply intersected in four-dimensional space-time. It was a pure, unadulterated cosmic accident. Or at least, that's what they wanted us to believe. At the moment of Atlas's maneuver, Psyche was performing a planned calibration procedure. This is a routine operation. The spacecraft slowly turns, pointing its instruments at known stars or empty patches of sky so that engineers on Earth can check their accuracy and make adjustments. And so, as part of this procedure, Psyche's main photoscanner was pointed, for a few precious minutes, exactly at the point in space where Atlas was located. Picture the scene at the JPL Flight Control Center in Pasadena. Dozens of engineers are monitoring the streams of telemetry coming from the spacecraft via the antennas of the Deep Space Network. The data arrives with a delay of several minutes, but it flows continuously. Bits and bytes describing the status of every sensor, every system, and suddenly, on the screens of the operators responsible for the payload, something strange happens. The data from the magnetometer begins to show a sharp, anomalous spike. The magnetic field strength in the surrounding space, usually stable and predictable, suddenly increases by several orders of magnitude. Simultaneously, the gamma-ray spectrometer records a short but intense burst of radiation with a very specific energy signature, unlike either the solar wind or cosmic rays. And then, silence. Complete, absolute, digital silence. The telemetry stream from Psyche cuts out. On all screens in the control center, a red message flashes. Loss of signal. After several tense hours of waiting, the system kicked in again. NASA released a brief statement. The Psyche spacecraft had encountered an unexpected stream of high-energy solar particles, which triggered its safety protocols. The craft automatically entered safe mode, a state of minimal power consumption where all scientific instruments are turned off, and the main antenna is pointed at Earth, awaiting commands. Communication was restored 12 hours later. All systems were nominal. The mission continues. It was a perfect story. Solar storms are a real and constant threat to space technology. Entering safe mode is a standard procedure. Nothing unusual. Nothing to see here. Move along. But it was here, in this sterile, bureaucratic silence, that a ghost was hiding. And to see it, you had to venture into the dustiest and most convoluted corridors of NASA's digital universe, their public archives. The Planetary Data System, or PDS, is the holy grail for any space researcher. It's a gigantic, distributed library where NASA is required by law to publish all scientific data obtained from its interplanetary missions. This doesn't happen immediately. The science teams working on a mission usually have exclusive access to the data for 6 months to a year to make their discoveries and publish papers. But after this embargo period, all raw data must become public. Every image, every spectrum, every byte of telemetry. The PDS publication protocol is incredibly strict and pedantic. Each file has a unique name describing the instrument, date, time, and type of observation. All files are listed in a special manifest document. This is to ensure that not a single bit of information can be lost or altered without a trace. It's a promise of transparency, written in code. And so, 6 months after the glitch, when the data from Psyche for that period was due to appear in the public domain, the Seekers began their hunt. They went to the Psyche Mission Archive server. They found the correct directory, year 2023, day 143, May 23rd. They opened the manifest listing all the telemetry files for that day, and their hearts stopped. In the list, between the files timestamped 0310 UTC and 0325 UTC, there was a hole. A 15-minute interval perfectly coinciding with the time of Atlas's maneuver and Psyche's glitch was simply missing. No, the files weren't marked classified or under additional review. They simply did not exist. It was as if, for those 15 minutes, the spacecraft had ceased to be a part of our reality. But that was only the beginning. An even eerier discovery awaited them in the image archive. According to the manifest, at the moment of the glitch, Psyche's camera was supposed to take a series of 3 calibration images. But when the researchers tried to download them, the server returned a 404 error. File not found. It was a digital ghost. There was an entry in the catalog, but the book itself was not on the shelf. In the world of data archiving, this is nonsense. It cannot happen. Data can be corrupted, and it would be flagged accordingly. It can be classified, and access would be restricted. But a public manifest referencing a non-existent file is not a protocol error. It is a sign of crude, panicked intervention. It's like finding a mention of a key piece of evidence in a police report, only to find an empty box where it should be in the evidence locker. The absence is the evidence. And here we can formulate a blood-chilling hypothesis. What if Psyche didn't just accidentally see Atlas's maneuver? What if it recorded it in full detail? What if, in those 3 missing images, we would have seen not just a point of light, but something entirely different? Something that made the engineers at JPL and their overseers at the Pentagon take an unprecedented step, not to classify the data, but to physically cut it out of history, hoping no one would notice. What could they have seen? Perhaps they saw the source of the impulse. Not a jet of gas, but a distortion of space-time around the object. A gravitational effect that modern physics considers impossible. Perhaps they saw the surface of Atlas momentarily become transparent, revealing a complex, glowing internal structure. Biomechanical. Or perhaps, most terrifyingly, they saw nothing. The object simply shifted from one point to another instantly, violating all known laws of inertia. But the missing images are only part of the puzzle. The missing telemetry was just as important. The spike on the magnetometer and gamma-ray spectrometer. The official version blamed it on a solar storm. But any solar storm would have been recorded by other spacecraft and ground-based observatories. And on that day, May 23rd, not a single significant solar event was registered. The spike was local. Its source was not our star. Its source was Atlas. The silence was not accidental. It was not a glitch. It was a response to what the Psyche spacecraft saw in those 3 missing days. It saw not just a maneuver. It recorded an act of technology that is beyond our comprehension. A technology capable of manipulating magnetic fields, generating directed radiation, and perhaps the very fabric of space. And the system, faced with this irrefutable proof, did the only thing it knows how to do in such situations. It hit the delete button. But the ghost of the deleted file remained, and its whisper was louder than any press release. It whispered that they hadn't just found something, they had made contact, unfriendly, nonverbal, but unambiguous. A contact that showed that the guest in our system is not just a traveler, he is a player whose rules we are only beginning to understand. And this contact scared them so much that they chose to lie to the entire world, to stage a grand spectacle about flying saucers, just to buy a little more time. Time to understand what they really saw in those missing files. The digital ghost left in the Psyche mission archives was deafeningly eloquent. The missing files were not just an absence of data. They were an outline, tracing something the system deemed too dangerous for our eyes. But an outline is not a picture. To fill this void, to give the ghost flesh, required a voice from the outside. A voice unbound by protocols and non-disclosure agreements. The voice of an oracle. In our technological age, oracles do not reside in the temples of Delphi. They live in the quiet of suburban homes, far from the light pollution of big cities. Their temples are homemade observatories, and their tripods are server arrays crunching petabytes of data. They are the global, decentralized nervous system of human curiosity, a network of seekers whose collective power sometimes surpasses that of individual state institutions. And in this story, the oracle's name was Stephen Burns. Burns was neither a world-renowned astrophysicist nor a former intelligence agent. He was the complete opposite of David Grusch, a quiet, meticulous man of about 65, a retired telecommunications systems engineer who, after retirement, dedicated his life to a single passion: meteor hunting. In the arid Arizona desert, an hour's drive from the nearest town, he built what he affectionately called the Sentinel. It was not just an observatory with a single telescope. It was a complex, fully automated system of 8 cameras equipped with highly sensitive electron-multiplying CCD sensors. These cameras were not designed to take beautiful, long-exposure pictures of nebulae. Their task was different: to continuously scan the sky every night, taking hundreds of short exposures per second. The goal was to catch the fleeting, faint flashes of bolides and meteors entering Earth's atmosphere. Burns was not just an amateur, he was a perfectionist. His system was calibrated to fractions of an arcsecond. His self-written software automatically filtered out satellite flares, airplane flyovers, and space debris. He had created the perfect instrument for recording fast, unpredictable events in the sky. And he had no idea that on the night of May 23rd, 2023, his Sentinel would catch not a rock falling to Earth, but a signal coming from the very depths of space. That night, everything was proceeding as usual. The sky was crystal clear, the humidity minimal. Burns's system was operating normally, recording gigabytes of information onto solid-state drives. The next morning, over a cup of coffee, Stephen ran his usual analysis script. The program sifted through the night's data, flagging all recorded events and classifying them. A few minutes later, a report appeared on the screen. Dozens of meteors, a few bolides from the Eta Aquariid shower, 3 Starlink satellites flying in perfect formation. Routine. But at the very end of the list was a single line, highlighted in red. The system had marked it as Unidentified Anomaly, Class 3. This was the highest level of uncertainty, reserved for events that didn't fit any known pattern. The report indicated the exact time, 03:12:47 UTC, and coordinates pointing to the constellation Taurus. There were no bright stars or known satellites at this point in the sky, but there was something else. 3I Atlas was there. Stephen Burns's heart beat a little faster. He opened the folder with the raw files. His system saved not only the final images, but also all the raw frames preceding and following the event. He found the right time segment and began to view the frames manually. At first, he saw nothing. The faint, barely perceptible dot of Atlas was slowly crawling against the background of stars. But his program was smarter than the human eye. It had caught something that was almost invisible. Burns applied several digital filters, enhanced the contrast, and began a process called frame stacking. He took 3 consecutive frames, captured hundredths of a second apart, and overlaid them. And that's when he saw it. What appeared on his screen was neither a flash nor a jet of gas. It was a structure. Around the dim point of Atlas for just 3 frames, amounting to about 0.03 of a second of real time, a faint, almost ghostly geometric shape manifested. It was a series of 3 perfectly equilateral triangles, nested within each other. The largest triangle was oriented with its vertex up relative to the plane of the ecliptic. The next, smaller one was inverted by 180 degrees, and the smallest one in the center repeated the orientation of the first. The structure was perfectly symmetrical, its lines unnaturally sharp. It didn't glow with a bright light. Rather, it looked like a distortion, like a ripple on the surface of water, a barely perceptible refraction of the starlight behind it. 0.03 of a second later, it vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving no trace. Burns's first thought was, of course, an error, an artifact. It could be a lens flare. It could be a defect in the CCD sensor. It could be 3 high-energy particles hitting the sensor simultaneously, creating the illusion of a shape. Like a true engineer, Burns spent the next 48 hours trying to disprove himself. He checked all 8 of his system's cameras. Only the one pointed at Atlas had recorded the anomaly. He checked the calibration logs. The optics were in perfect condition. He analyzed thousands of other images taken that night. No similar artifacts. He checked satellite flyover databases. Not a single known object was in the camera's field of view at that moment. He even checked data from nearby seismic stations to rule out vibration. Nothing. The anomaly was real. It was in the sky. This was not proof of an alien spaceship. It was something more subtle and far stranger. It was the visual signature of an event, and this signature perfectly filled the gap left by the system. Recall the missing data from Psyche. The loss of signal occurred in the exact same time interval. The spike on the magnetometer and gamma-ray spectrometer, which they blamed on a solar storm, was recorded seconds before. What if this triangular structure was the source of that spike? What if it wasn't just light, but the visual manifestation of some kind of energy field? A field that created the invisible impulse that changed Atlas's orbit and simultaneously disabled the electronics of Psyche, 80 million kilometers, 50 million miles away. The hypothesis was bold, almost insane, but it explained everything. It explained the lack of a flare during outgassing, because there was no outgassing. It explained the nature of the maneuver. It wasn't a reactive propulsion, but some kind of field or gravitational drive. It explained the glitch on Psyche. It wasn't a glitch, but a side effect of this drive's operation. And most importantly, it explained the system's panic and their desperate attempt to hide everything. Because it's one thing to find the wreckage of a ship that crashed 50 years ago. It's quite another to witness, live, the operation of a technology that violates the known laws of physics. This is the transition from archaeology to active contact. Stephen Burns, realizing the weight of his discovery, didn't run to the newspapers. He acted like a true seeker. He anonymously published his raw data and detailed analysis on the same private forum where JPL's theory had been debunked. The community's reaction was explosive. First, a wave of skepticism. His data was run through dozens of independent analysis programs. People looked for errors, artifacts, any rational explanation. But Burns's methodology was flawless. His data was clean. Gradually, skepticism gave way to awe. And then someone asked the crucial question: if this signature is real, has it appeared before? A new hunt began, this time into the past. Dozens of seekers started combing through old astronomical archives, looking for similar fleeting geometric structures near other anomalous events. They analyzed the data on Oumuamua at the moment of its unexplained non-gravitational acceleration. and on several frames taken by a telescope in Hawaii, they found it. Fainter, distorted by atmospheric interference, but unmistakably the same nested triangular structure. They checked the archives related to the WOW signal in 1977. That night, an auxiliary telescope had accidentally been imaging the same patch of sky, and on a single, noisy frame, after hours of digital restoration, the same ghostly symbol emerged. This changed everything. The triangle captured by Stephen Burns was not just an anomaly. It was a signature, a recurring, recognizable mark that some phenomenon or intelligence had been leaving in space-time for decades. The Oracle's voice didn't just fill a gap in the data. It gave us a Rosetta Stone. It showed that disparate anomalies, Oumuamua, the WOW signal, the maneuver of Atlas, might be links in the same chain. These were not just random oddities in an indifferent universe. They were tracks of something moving in the shadows, using a technology we are only just beginning to see out of the corner of our eye. And now, thanks to Stephen Burns, we knew what to look for. We had the key, and the system, which had tried so desperately to hide a single file, suddenly faced the possibility that its entire archive of secrets could be cracked with this one key. Their game of concealment was lost. A new, far more dangerous game was beginning. The key we received from Stephen Burns was not just an image. It was a cipher, a symbol, repeating through time and space, linking together events that the system had so carefully tried to present to us as isolated, unrelated anomalies. With this key, we can do what any structure built on lies fears most. We can draw a map of the conspiracy. Not in the sense used to describe paranoid theories about secret societies, but in its original engineering sense, as a schematic, a blueprint showing how individual elements connect to form a single functioning mechanism. We begin to see not a chaos of random events, but the ice-cold, flawless logic of a choreography. Imagine a giant, dark board on which we will now begin to place dots. Each dot is a historical fact, an undeniable event, and when we connect them in the correct order, the outline of a monstrous, unthinkable picture will emerge. This is the information cascade. Our first point, our prime meridian, is August 15th, 1977. That night, the Big Ear radio telescope in Ohio, scanning the sky as part of the SETI project, recorded a signal that would go down in history. 72 seconds of intense, narrow-band radio emission coming from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. The signal was so powerful and so close to the predicted hydrogen frequency that astronomer Jerry Emin, reviewing the printouts the next day, circled it in red pen and wrote a single word in the margin. Wow. Official science spent decades trying to explain the WOW signal. It was attributed to a reflection from space debris, a rare astrophysical phenomenon, even an equipment malfunction. But none of these theories stood up to scrutiny. The signal remained unique, unexplained. It was the first knock on our door. Quiet, polite, but insistent. The system did what it always does with singular anomalies. It placed it in the category of interesting but unsolvable mysteries, and safely forgot about it. But now, thanks to the seekers who re-examined the old archives, we know there was more that night. The ghostly triangular signature. The signal wasn't just a sound. It was marked. It wasn't an anonymous message. It was a letter with a seal. For 40 years, silence reigned in space. Or rather, we stopped listening again. The next point on our map, October 19th, 2017. The Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii discovers the first ever confirmed interstellar object, One-Eye Oumuamua. It had already passed perihelion and was moving away from the sun. And immediately, the strangeness began. its trajectory, its shape, its rotation, its color. Everything was anomalous. But the main mystery was its non-gravitational acceleration. The object was moving away from the sun faster than it should have. The official explanation, proposed with great difficulty, was the outgassing of a hydrogen iceberg, a hypothesis that even its authors admitted was highly exotic. But what happened on Earth in the very same weeks and months when the astronomical community was racking its brains over Oumuamua? Remember, on December 16th, 2017, just 2 months after the discovery of Oumuamua, the New York Times published a bombshell article that changed the rules of the game forever. It revealed the existence of a secret Pentagon program to study UFOs, AA-TIP. And most importantly, along with the article, 3 videos filmed from the cockpits of U.S. Navy fighter jets were released. FLIR 1, Gimbal, and Go Fast. The very same Tic Tac videos. A coincidence? The official story is that it was the result of long journalistic work and the courage of insiders like Lua Elizondo. But correlation does not imply causation, right? However, let's look at it from another angle. What if it wasn't just a journalistic breakthrough, but a controlled leak? What if the system, faced with the arrival of a second, much more obvious letter with a seal in the form of Oumuamua, realized it could no longer maintain absolute denial? They saw that the visitor wasn't just knocking, but was already peering in the windows. And they made a strategic decision to begin a slow, managed disclosure. To release old, no longer critical data from a decade ago to the public to prepare the ground without revealing the main, current threat. This was the first act of preemptive information defense. They started talking about the past to avoid talking about the present. Oumuamua was the stimulus. The video release was the response. Now the pace quickens. The third, brightest point appears on our map. May 23rd, 2023. 3i Atlas performs its impossible maneuver. And again, we see the same triangular signature, but this time in incredible resolution, thanks to Stephen Burns. This is no longer just a letter. It's an official notification, a notification that the guest isn't just passing through, it's staying. And what is the system's reaction? It becomes almost frantic. Just 2 weeks after the maneuver, on June 5th, 2023, David Grusch gives his first classified testimony to the Intelligence Committee. On July 26th, just 2 months after the maneuver, he gives his testimony publicly, under oath, in Congress. 2 months. In a world of bureaucracy and secrecy where approving a single document can take years, this isn't just fast. It's instantaneous. It's the speed of an emergency. It's like how a government reacts to an imminent asteroid impact or the start of a nuclear war. The entire cumbersome, slow-moving machine of the system suddenly acquired incredible agility. A coincidence? Or a direct cause and effect relationship? Now let's connect these dots. 1977, the WOW signal, a first contact, marked with the triangular signature. The system classifies it as an anomaly and buries it in the archives. 2017, Oumuamua, a second, more overt contact, again with the same signature. The system realizes this is no longer a coincidence and begins a preemptive information campaign, leaking old UFO videos. This is Protocol Alpha, slow acclimation. 2023, 3i Atlas, a third contact. Not just a flyby, but a deliberate entry into orbit in our system. This is no longer contact. This is arrival. And the system panics. It activates Protocol Beta, an emergency, massive diversion of attention. The loudest show in history is launched. Public hearings in Congress. The full power of the world's media is directed at discussing David Grusch, non-human biologics, and crashed saucers. This is not chaos. This is architecture. An architecture of silence built around the most important event in human history. They are not hiding the truth about UFOs. They are using the truth about UFOs to hide the truth about Atlas. These are two completely different levels of threat. It's one thing to know that the wreckage of a crashed ship lies in a hangar at Area 51. It's quite another to realize that an object the size of a mountain, possessing technology capable of manipulating space, and whose intentions are completely unknown, is orbiting right above your head. The first is history. The second is reality. So who is conducting this orchestra of silence? Who is this architect? The first suspicion, of course, falls on the Pentagon, on the U.S. intelligence community. But that's too simple. They are the executors, the soldiers on the front line of the information war. Their job is to follow orders, but who gives them? NASA, even less likely. NASA is a civilian agency that, despite all its secrecy, is still oriented towards science and data publication. Deleting files from the PDS archive is an almost sacrilegious act for them, possible only under external pressure, an order that cannot be refused. So who stands above them all? Who has enough authority to silence both the military and the scientists? All threads lead to one place, not Washington, not Brussels, but to the quiet, respectable offices in Geneva, to one of the least known but perhaps most influential bodies of the United Nations. Officially, it's called the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. But according to rumors circulating on private forums of former diplomats and intelligence officers, there is a special, unpublicized working group within this committee. Its name sounds dull and bureaucratic. Subgroup for the Analysis and Protocolling of Contact with Extraterrestrial Intelligence. It is this subgroup, composed not of politicians but of strategists, scientists, and crisis management experts, that has been developing protocols for first contact for decades. And if these rumors are to be believed, in early 2023, several months before the Atlas maneuver, this subgroup held an emergency closed session and amended its main document. They activated Protocol 7. What this protocol contains is unknown, but its general title has leaked out, and it sounds chilling. Narrative management under conditions of confirmed but uncontrolled arrival. This is no longer just a cover-up. This is a plan. A plan to manage our perception of reality in the face of an event they can no longer hide. And the congressional hearings are just the first visible step of this plan. As for the steps that will follow, we can only guess. The map of the conspiracy we've drawn is frightening in its symmetry and logic. The WOW signal, Oumuamua, 3-eye Atlas, 3 points, 3 contacts, each met with an escalating response from the system. From ignorance to a controlled leak, from a leak to a massive diversion operation. The architecture of silence and disinformation is clear, but any complex construction, any multi-year concealment operation must answer one fundamental, ruthless question that lies at the heart of any investigation. Cui bono? Who benefits? Why go to such lengths? Why risk public trust by staging such a grand spectacle? The simplest and most obvious reason, preventing global panic, doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Modern society lives in a state of permanent crisis. We've survived pandemics, economic collapses, the threat of nuclear war. Our collective psyche, strange as it may seem, has become more resilient to shocks. The news of an artificial object detected in space would certainly cause a stir. But would it lead to the immediate collapse of civilization? Doubtful. People would worry, argue, fear, but the next morning most would still go to work. The motive must be deeper. It must be tied not so much to us, the ordinary people, as to the system itself, to its power, its stability, its survival. To understand this motive, we need to delve into the cold, cynical logic of institutional behavior and the psychology of power. The system is not a comic book villain seeking world domination. It's a self-preserving organism. Its primary, almost biological goal is to maintain homeostasis, to preserve the existing order of things, stability, and most importantly, control of the narrative. Because whoever controls the narrative, the story we tell ourselves about how the world works, controls everything. The arrival of 3I Atlas poses not one, but 3 existential threats to this control. And each one is so serious that it justifies any, even the most extreme, measures of concealment. The first threat is technological. Imagine for a moment that the truth about Atlas becomes public knowledge. Not just the fact of its existence, but the data on its capabilities obtained from Psyche. The ability for exhaust-free, possibly gravitational propulsion. The ability to generate powerful, directed energy fields. The ability, perhaps, to manipulate the very fabric of space. What happens the next day? The most insane, uncontrollable arms race in human history begins. Every country, every corporation, every research institute will throw all its resources into deciphering and replicating this technology. Forget the atomic bomb. Whoever first masters the Atlas drive will gain an absolute advantage. They could move objects without fuel. They could create impenetrable energy shields. They could theoretically deliver warheads to any point on the planet in seconds, bypassing all existing missile defense systems. The global balance of power, so painstakingly maintained for 70 years, would collapse overnight. It would be the end of the era of mutually assured destruction and the beginning of an era of absolute dominance by a single player. The system, represented by its key actors, the US, China, Russia, cannot allow this. Therefore, the primary task becomes not disclosure, but the monopolization of knowledge. They must be the first to understand how it works, and for that, they need time. Time that can only be bought one way, through a global diversion of attention. While we're all arguing about what exactly crashed at Roswell in '47, their best minds in secret labs are trying to decode that very missing data from Psyche. The cover-up is not an act of cowardice. It's an act of strategic necessity in a new, Cold War for technological supremacy. The second threat is economic and social. Our modern civilization is built on one fundamental resource, energy, and our entire economy is based on its scarcity. We extract, transport, and burn fossil fuels. We build complex and dangerous nuclear power plants. We invest trillions in renewable sources. The price of energy determines everything, from the cost of bread to geopolitical alliances. Now, imagine that the technology of Atlas implies not only a propulsion system but also a power source, a source that apparently requires no fuel and can power an object the size of a mountain for millennia. If this technology becomes publicly available, what happens to our economic system? The energy sector, the foundation of global GDP, would simply vanish. The stocks of oil giants would turn to dust. Entire countries whose prosperity is built on hydrocarbon exports would go bankrupt. This would not just be a financial crisis, it would be a complete reset of the world economy. But that's only the beginning. What is money? It's the equivalent of human labor, which in turn is the application of energy. If energy becomes practically free and limitless, the very concept of labor and value changes. Automation will reach its logical conclusion. Any job can be done by a robot powered by an inexhaustible energy source. An era of total abundance will dawn. Sounds like a utopia, doesn't it? But for the system, it's an apocalypse, because its entire structure is based on managing scarcity. Social hierarchies, governments, laws, all are tools for distributing limited resources. In a world of unlimited resources, these tools become obsolete. This means the end of power as we know it. To prevent this collapse, The transition to a new energy paradigm must be evolutionary, not revolutionary. It must last for decades, under the complete control of the system. They must first create a new economic model, new mechanisms of control, and only then, slowly, drop by drop, release the new technology to the world. And for that, they need time again. The cover-up is not a conspiracy against progress. It's an attempt to prevent the chaos that this progress could unleash. But the third threat is the deepest, the most existential. It is an ontological threat. It concerns our very worldview, our place in the universe. Throughout history, humanity has lived with one fundamental certainty. We are the pinnacle of creation. Whether by the will of God or as a result of blind evolution, we considered ourselves the most intelligent, most complex beings in the known universe. This certainty is the foundation of our religions, our philosophies, our morality. Atlas shatters this certainty with its mere existence. It doesn't just prove that we are not alone. It proves that we are not the first, and perhaps, not by a long shot, the smartest. The technology it demonstrates is thousands, if not millions, of years ahead of ours. We are to its creators what ants are to us. We can study their behavior, admire the complexity of their anthill, but we will never consider them equals. What will happen to humanity when it realizes its new status? What will happen to world religions when it turns out that the sacred texts describing the creation of the world were, to put it mildly, incomplete? What will become of our faith in progress when we see that someone has already reached its end? This is called ontological shock, and its consequences are unpredictable. It could lead to the emergence of new cargo cults worshipping the aliens. It could cause a wave of mass despair and nihilism. It could destroy the very foundations of our civilization, which, as it turns out, were built on the false premise of our own greatness. The system, in the form of that UN committee, understands this perfectly. Their protocols are likely based on historical examples. Remember what happened when the advanced civilizations of Europe encountered the indigenous peoples of the Americas or Australia. Contact almost always led to the collapse of the less developed culture, not just because of wars and diseases, but because of the psychological shock, the destruction of their worldview. Now imagine this process on a planetary scale. To avoid this, the system must prepare us, slowly, carefully, step by step. And the congressional hearings are the perfect first step. They introduce the idea of non-human intelligence into the public consciousness, but they do so in a safe, historical context. They tell us, yes, they exist, but they are like us. They have technology, they build craft, and these crafts sometimes break and crash on Earth. This makes them understandable, almost familiar. It humanizes the alien, turning an existential threat into a technological puzzle. It's a brilliant psychological inoculation. They are preparing us for the truth by feeding us a carefully dosed lie. So the motive is clear. It's not just panic. It's the system's triple existential terror of losing control. Control over technology, control over the economy, and control over reality itself. And by this logic, concealment is not just possible. It is absolutely necessary from their point of view. But here arises the final, most disturbing question. What if their motive is even darker? What if they are hiding the truth not to protect us from panic or prepare us for the future? What if they are hiding it to prepare a response? A response we will never be told about. What if they view Atlas not as a guest, not as a mystery, but as a threat? What if that triangular signature is not just a side effect of the engine, but something else? A tag, a targeting marker. What if they believe that Atlas didn't just arrive? It arrived for something, or someone. And in this scenario, silence is not just a strategy, It's a military ruse. They pretend not to see anything to buy time to prepare for a conflict we can't even imagine. And then the congressional hearings take on an even more sinister meaning. They aren't just distracting us. They are testing our reaction. They are simulating how society will react to news of aliens to understand whether, at hour zero, they can count on our support, or if they will have to act in complete isolation. This is no longer just a cover-up. It's a mobilization. Quiet, invisible, informational. And we are all, without knowing it, participants in it. The digital ghost left in the Psyche mission archives was deafeningly eloquent. The missing files were not just an absence of data. They were an outline, tracing something the system deemed too dangerous for our eyes. But an outline is not a picture. To fill this void, to give the ghost flesh, required a voice from the outside. A voice unbound by protocols and non-disclosure agreements. The voice of an oracle. In our technological age, oracles do not reside in the temples of Delphi. They live in the quiet of suburban homes, far from the light pollution of big cities. Their temples are homemade observatories, and their tripods are server arrays crunching petabytes of data. They are the global, decentralized nervous system of human curiosity, a network of seekers whose collective power sometimes surpasses that of individual state institutions. And in this story, the oracle's name was Stephen Burns. Burns was neither a world-renowned astrophysicist nor a former intelligence agent. He was the complete opposite of David Grusch, a quiet, meticulous man of about 65, a retired telecommunications systems engineer who, after retirement, dedicated his life to a single passion: meteor hunting. In the arid Arizona desert, an hour's drive from the nearest town, he built what he affectionately called the Sentinel. It was not just an observatory with a single telescope. It was a complex, fully automated system of 8 cameras equipped with highly sensitive, electron-multiplying CCD sensors. These cameras were not designed to take beautiful, long-exposure pictures of nebulae. Their task was different: to continuously scan the sky every night, taking hundreds of short exposures per second. The goal was to catch the fleeting, faint flashes of bolides and meteors entering Earth's atmosphere. Burns was not just an amateur. He was a perfectionist. His system was calibrated to fractions of an arcsecond. His self-written software automatically filtered out satellite flares, airplane flyovers, and space debris. He had created the perfect instrument for recording fast, unpredictable events in the sky. And he had no idea that on the night of May 23rd, 2023, his Sentinel would catch not a rock falling to Earth, but a signal coming from the very depths of space. That night, everything was proceeding as usual. The sky was crystal clear, the humidity minimal. Burns' system was operating normally, recording gigabytes of information onto solid-state drives. The next morning, over a cup of coffee, Stephen ran his usual analysis script. The program sifted through the night's data, flagging all recorded events and classifying them. A few minutes later, a report appeared on the screen. Dozens of meteors, a few bolides from the Eta Aquariids shower, 3 Starlink satellites flying in perfect formation. Routine. But at the very end of the list was a single line, highlighted in red. The system had marked it as Unidentified Anomaly, Class 3. This was the highest level of uncertainty, reserved for events that didn't fit any known pattern. The report indicated the exact time, 03/12/47 UTC, and coordinates pointing to the constellation Taurus. There were no bright stars or known satellites at this point in the sky, but there was something else. 3I Atlas was there. Stephen Burns' heart beat a little faster. He opened the folder with the raw files. His system saved not only the final images, but also all the raw frames preceding and following the event. He found the right time segment and began to view the frames manually. At first, he saw nothing. The faint, barely perceptible dot of Atlas was slowly crawling against the background of stars. But his program was smarter than the human eye. It had caught something that was almost invisible. Burns applied several digital filters, enhanced the contrast, and began a process called frame stacking. He took 3 consecutive frames, captured hundredths of a second apart, and overlaid them. And that's when he saw it. What appeared on his screen was neither a flash nor a jet of gas. It was a structure. Around the dim point of Atlas, for just 3 frames, amounting to about 300ths of a second of real time, a faint, almost ghostly geometric shape manifested. It was a series of 3 perfectly equilateral triangles, nested within each other. The largest triangle was oriented with its vertex up, relative to the plane of the ecliptic. The next, smaller one was inverted by 180 degrees, and the smallest one in the center repeated the orientation of the first. The structure was perfectly symmetrical, its lines unnaturally sharp. It didn't glow with a bright light. Rather, it looked like a distortion. Like a ripple on the surface of water, a barely perceptible refraction of the starlight behind it. 300ths of a second later, it vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving no trace. Burns's first thought was, of course, an error, an artifact. It could be a lens flare. It could be a defect in the CCD sensor. It could be 3 high-energy particles hitting the sensor simultaneously, creating the illusion of a shape. Like a true engineer, Burns spent the next 48 hours trying to disprove himself. He checked all 8 of his system's cameras. Only the one pointed at Atlas had recorded the anomaly. He checked the calibration logs. The optics were in perfect condition. He analyzed thousands of other images taken that night. No similar artifacts. He checked satellite flyover databases. Not a single known object was in the camera's field of view at that moment. He even checked data from nearby seismic stations to rule out vibration. Nothing. The anomaly was real. It was in the sky. This was not proof of an alien spaceship. It was something more subtle and far stranger. It was the visual signature of an event. And this signature perfectly filled the gap left by the system. Recall the missing data from Psyche. The loss of signal occurred in the exact same time interval. The spike on the magnetometer and gamma-ray spectrometer, which they blamed on a solar storm, was recorded seconds before. What if this triangular structure was the source of that spike? What if it wasn't just light, but the visual manifestation of some kind of energy field? A field that created the invisible impulse that changed Atlas's orbit and simultaneously disabled the electronics of Psyche, 80 million kilometers, 50 million miles away. The hypothesis was bold, almost insane, but it explained everything. It explained the lack of a flare during outgassing, because there was no outgassing. It explained the nature of the maneuver. It wasn't a reactive propulsion, but some kind of field or gravitational drive. It explained the glitch on Psyche. It wasn't a glitch, but a side effect of this drive's operation. And most importantly, it explained the system's panic and their desperate attempt to hide everything. Because it's one thing to find the wreckage of a ship that crashed 50 years ago. It's quite another to witness, live, the operation of a technology that violates the known laws of physics. This is the transition from archaeology to active contact. Stephen Burns, realizing the weight of his discovery, didn't run to the newspapers. He acted like a true seeker. He anonymously published his raw data and detailed analysis on the same private forum where JPL's theory had been debunked. The community's reaction was explosive. First, a wave of skepticism. His data was run through dozens of independent analysis programs. People looked for errors, artifacts, any rational explanation. But Burns's methodology was flawless. His data was clean. Gradually, skepticism gave way to awe. And then someone asked the crucial question: if this signature is real, Has it appeared before? A new hunt began, this time into the past. Dozens of seekers started combing through old astronomical archives, looking for similar fleeting geometric structures near other anomalous events. They analyzed the data on Oumuamua at the moment of its unexplained non-gravitational acceleration, and on several frames taken by a telescope in Hawaii, they found it. Fainter, distorted by atmospheric interference, but unmistakably the same nested triangular structure. They checked the archives related to the WOW signal in 1977. That night, an auxiliary telescope had accidentally been imaging the same patch of sky, and on a single, noisy frame, after hours of digital restoration, the same ghostly symbol emerged. This changed everything. The triangle captured by Stephen Burns was not just an anomaly. It was a signature, a recurring, recognizable mark that some phenomenon or intelligence had been leaving in space-time for decades. The Oracle's voice didn't just fill a gap in the data. It gave us a Rosetta Stone. It showed that disparate anomalies, Oumuamua, the WOW signal, the maneuver of Atlas, might be links in the same chain. These were not just random oddities in an indifferent universe. They were tracks of something moving in the shadows, using a technology we are only just beginning to see out of the corner of our eye. And now, thanks to Stephen Burns, we knew what to look for. We had the key. And the system, which had tried so desperately to hide a single file, suddenly faced the possibility that its entire archive of secrets could be cracked with this one key. Their game of concealment was lost. A new, far more dangerous game was beginning. Let's for a moment forget everything we've talked about. Forget the UN committee, the triangular signature, the biomechanical giants. Let's look at this whole story through the eyes of a convinced rational skeptic. A scientist who believes not in conspiracies but in data, and is guided not by intuition, but by the principle of Occam's razor, which states, the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. What would this scientist see? He would see a chain of interesting, but not necessarily connected events, for each of which a simpler, more natural explanation can be found. Let's start from the beginning. The Congressional hearings. Our theory claims this was a meticulously orchestrated operation, triggered by the maneuver of Atlas. The skeptic would say, this is a classic thinking error known as post hoc ergo propter hoc. After this, therefore, because of this. Correlation in time does not prove a causal link. The appearance of David Grusch and the sudden transparency of the Pentagon have a much simpler and more mundane explanation. It's the result of years of work by a group of journalists, activists, and former military personnel like Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon. For years, they've been chipping away at the wall, using their connections, legislative levers, and media influence. And in 2023, their efforts simply reached a critical mass. New laws were passed requiring the government to report on UAPs. New whistleblower protection mechanisms were created. What we are seeing is not a panic reaction to an external threat. It's the result of a slow, painful, but entirely terrestrial bureaucratic and political struggle. It's not a conspiracy. It's democratic institutions at work. Not as fast as we'd like, but work nonetheless. Moving on, the maneuver of Three-Eye Atlas. We debunked JPL's official theory of cascading outgassing by pointing to the absence of a flare, and that was a strong argument. But does that mean the only alternative is an artificial engine? The skeptic would say, not at all. We simply don't yet know all the possible mechanisms at play in interstellar objects. Perhaps there's some exotic physical process we're not yet aware of. For instance, interaction with dark matter. Or more likely, we simply misinterpreted the data. The absence of an optical flare doesn't mean a complete absence of an outburst. What if the outburst consisted not of dust and ordinary gas, but of something that doesn't reflect light? For example, pure, ultra-cold molecular hydrogen, or a stream of neutrinos. Sounds fantastic. No more fantastic than the hypothesis of a biomechanical ship. Science constantly encounters phenomena that at first seem impossible, and then find their explanation within new, more complete theories. To call Atlas artificial is an argument from ignorance. We can't explain it by natural causes, therefore, it's artificial. But that's a logical fallacy. The correct scientific approach is to keep looking for a natural explanation, no matter how complex it may be. Now for the missing data from Psyche. We presented this as an act of malicious concealment. The skeptic would offer a much more boring, but also more probable explanation. Bureaucratic chaos. NASA is a gigantic organization. The PDS archives are an incredibly complex system. Mistakes happen. Files can be corrupted during transmission from the spacecraft. They can be lost due to a server failure. They can be improperly indexed. A 404 error and a hole in the manifest are most likely not the result of a Men in Black cleanup, but the result of simple human error, or a technical glitch that just hasn't been fixed yet. As for the glitch of the spacecraft itself, the solar activity version, though not confirmed by a major storm, is not impossible. Space is full of surprises. It could have been a local, narrowly directed stream of particles not detected by other sensors. Or the glitch could have been caused by an internal problem on the spacecraft itself, a short circuit, a software error. These things happen with space technology all the time. To look for a conspiracy here is to see malicious intent where there is most likely simple incompetence or chance. And what about Stephen Burns's discovery? The ghostly, triangular structure. Our theory made it the cornerstone, the signature of aliens. The skeptic, while respecting Burns's work, would say that it's most likely a very rare, but still known, type of atmospheric or optical artifact. For example, the flyby of a microscopic, perfectly oriented ice crystal in the upper atmosphere could create exactly this kind of diffraction effect. Or it could have been a glint from a tiny, rotating piece of space debris in a very high orbit. The fact that Burns couldn't find an explanation for it doesn't mean one doesn't exist. And the fact that similar structures were retroactively found in old, noisy images of Oumuamua and the WOW signal is a classic example of apophenia and confirmation bias. When we start looking for a specific pattern, our brain is prone to finding it even in random noise. We see faces in clouds and constellations in a scattering of stars. We see triangles where there are none. Finally, the composition of Atlas itself. Rhenium, osmium, chiral organics. It sounds convincing. But the skeptic would remind us that the universe is a vast and diverse place. We have studied only a tiny fraction of it. To say that a certain chemical composition is impossible in nature is a display of scientific arrogance. Perhaps there are star systems so rich in heavy elements that the formation of such objects there is commonplace. As for chiral purity, that is indeed a strong argument for biology. But here too, there are alternative hypotheses. For example, exposure to circularly polarized ultraviolet light from a neutron star could, over millions of years, destroy amino acids of one orientation, leaving only the other. This is a natural, abiotic process that could lead to the observed result. And it's still simpler than the hypothesis of a giant living ship. So, what do we have from the skeptic's point of view? A series of unrelated events. Political processes in Washington, an unusual but probably natural comet, a bureaucratic error in NASA's archives, a rare atmospheric phenomenon. All of this is just a chain of incredible coincidences, and any attempt to link them into a single conspiracy is a manifestation of the human tendency to find order in chaos, to see malicious intent where only chance reigns. It would seem simple. The rational explanation wins. The pendulum has swung fully to the side of skepticism. Case closed. But there was something else. One detail that no skeptic could explain. One small, almost imperceptible thread that, if pulled, unravels this entire noble tapestry of rationality. That thread is time. The precise, to the second timing of the events. The maneuver of Atlas, the glitch on Psyche, and the anomaly recorded by Stephen Burns. According to our theory, these are three aspects of the same event. But the skeptic claims they are three independent coincidences. And this is where the ruthless mathematics of probability theory comes into play. One can calculate the probability of a NASA spacecraft failing due to a random error in the exact same minute that a comet on the other side of the solar system performs an anomalous maneuver. That probability is infinitesimally small. But one can go further and calculate the probability of a third event being added to these two. An independent observer on Earth recording a unique atmospheric artifact that by pure chance appears in the exact same point in the sky at the exact same second. And when you multiply these probabilities, you get a number so close to zero that it loses all physical meaning. It would be a number smaller than the probability of assembling a working Swiss chronometer by randomly tossing atoms onto a table. At some point, the chain of coincidences becomes so improbable that the hypothesis of a single cause, that is, a conspiracy or a coordinated event, becomes, by Occam's razor, the simpler and more logical explanation. This is the moment when skepticism turns into denial of the obvious, and it is this mathematical impossibility of coincidence that swings the pendulum back to our side, but now with a new, irrefutable force. They can explain each event individually, but they cannot explain their perfect, flawless, second-by-second synchronization. This cannot be a coincidence. It was choreography. And now, having returned from the cold lands of skepticism, we see this choreography not as a hypothesis, but as the only possible reality. Mathematics is the ruthless queen of the sciences. It is devoid of emotion and bias, and its verdict on the perfect synchronicity of the events surrounding 3I Atlas was final. This is not a coincidence. This is choreography. The pendulum of plausibility, having passed through the point of maximum skepticism, has swung back to our side with twice the force. But now we face a new, even more disturbing question. If Atlas is a product of high technology, then how high is it? How far have they advanced from our own scientific frontier? To try to grasp this, we need to broaden the context. We must move away from astronomy and dive into the world of our own most advanced and breakthrough technologies. Because only by comparing their capabilities with what we observe can we even begin to estimate the scale of the gap between them and us. And what we will discover will make us question not only our technological leadership, but the very nature of the reality we have learned to perceive and create. Let's start with what is closest to us, the sky. For millennia, the sky was a symbol of an unchanging divine order. Stars and planets moved along predictable paths. But in recent decades, we have begun to actively change this picture. We have created what can be called synthetic heavens. The first layer of this new sky was satellites. Thousands of spacecraft, from geostationary giants to swarms of Starlink, have created a new artificial ecosystem in low Earth orbit. They have become our second nervous system, providing communication, navigation, and observation. But they have also become a source of new illusions. Remember the famous trains of Elon Musk's satellites, which in their first years of deployment generated thousands of reports of UFO sightings. People saw an ordered movement of lights and mistook it for something extraterrestrial. This was the first time we massively deceived ourselves with our own technology. But this is just the beginning. The next layer of synthetic heavens is being created right now with powerful laser systems and adaptive optics. The laser guide star technology used in major observatories allows for the creation of an artificial star in the upper atmosphere by firing a powerful laser at a layer of sodium atoms at an altitude of about 90 kilometers, 56 miles. By observing the distortions of this artificial point of light, a computer adjusts the shape of the telescope's mirror in real time, compensating for atmospheric interference. We have learned to paint with light on the canvas of the night sky. Now imagine this technology being used not for science, but for other purposes. What if not one, but hundreds of such lasers were used, controlled by a complex algorithm? Could a holographic image be projected in the sky? Officially, no. But rumors of secret military programs like Project Bluebeam have circulated for decades. The idea is to use satellites and ground-based installations to create giant, realistic projections capable of simulating anything, from religious omens to an alien invasion. This is the ultimate weapon of psychological warfare. If we are already theoretically capable of this today, why can't they be? What if the very triangular signature that Stephen Burns recorded was not a side effect of an engine, but a message? A projection? A warning displayed on a celestial screen using technology we are only beginning to comprehend. Now let's descend from the heavens to the earth, into the cold silence of data centers where a new mind is being born. Artificial intelligence. For most people, AI is ChatGPT, Midjourney, voice assistants. But at the forefront of science, in the labs of Google DeepMind, OpenAI, and in the secret research centers of DARPA, systems of a completely different level are being created. These are so-called generative adversarial networks, GANs, where two neural networks enter into a game. One, the generator, tries to create a fake image, text, or signal indistinguishable from the real thing. The second, the discriminator, tries to expose the fake. They compete for millions of rounds, and in the process of this game, the generator learns to create illusions of such a degree of realism that not only a human, but also another, ultra-precise neural network cannot tell them apart. We have taught machines to lie, and to do it perfectly. Now let's apply this concept to our story. We relied on data from telescopes, on spectral analysis, on photometry. But what if this data is a forgery? What if some advanced form of AI linked to Atlas is intercepting signals from our space and ground-based observatories in real time and modifying them, inserting false spectral lines of rhenium and osmium, erasing traces of a real flare from them, drawing ghostly triangles in their place? This sounds like paranoia, but from a technological standpoint, it's entirely feasible. It's called a man-in-the-middle attack, but on a cosmic scale. We think we're looking at the universe, but in reality, we're looking at a screen they're showing us. In this scenario, the system on Earth might not even be a malevolent conspirator, but a victim of deception, just like us. They see the same anomalous data, and unable to explain it, panic and try to hide everything. And the real player, the real puppet master, is Atlas itself, waging a sophisticated information war with us, the purpose of which is completely unclear. But the most mind-boggling prospects open up when we turn to quantum technologies. Quantum computing, quantum communication, quantum sensors. This is no longer science fiction. It's a reality, albeit one still in its infancy. The key principles underlying them, superposition and entanglement, completely change our understanding of reality. Quantum entanglement, which Einstein called spooky action at a distance, allows two particles to remain connected to each other, regardless of the distance between them. Measuring a parameter of one particle instantly affects the state of the other, even if they are on opposite ends of the galaxy. We are only just learning to create and maintain entangled states for a few hundred qubits. Now imagine a civilization that has mastered this technology on a macroscopic scale. What if Atlas and the asteroid Psyche are not two separate objects, but two parts of a single, giant, quantum-entangled system? They are separated by millions of kilometers, but on a quantum level, they are a single entity. Then the maneuver of Atlas could have been caused not by an engine, but by a change in the state of psyche. And the arrival of our earthly spacecraft at the asteroid could have been the very measurement, the trigger that activated the entire system. This explains the instantaneous and exhaust-free nature of the maneuver. There was no energy transfer in the classical sense. There was only a transfer of information at superluminal speed through a quantum channel. It also explains why Atlas parked in that specific orbit. It needed to be in a certain gravitational and spatial configuration with Psyche to maintain their connection. In this light, the entire solar system transforms from an empty space with rocks into a giant quantum circuit. And we, with our chemical rockets, are like ants crawling on the motherboard of a supercomputer, not understanding its purpose. So, what do we have? Synthetic heavens capable of creating global illusions. Artificial intelligence capable of perfectly forging scientific data. Quantum networks capable of linking objects over cosmic distances. And these are our own, most advanced, yet still infant technologies. Now let's go back to Atlas. If its creators are even 1,000 years ahead of us, which is a blink of an eye in cosmic terms, what technologies do they possess? Perhaps they have learned not just to create illusions, but to construct reality itself. Perhaps they can create local bubbles of space-time with altered physical laws. Perhaps the triangular signature is not a projection or an artifact, but a shadow. A shadow of an object existing in extra dimensions, which we can only perceive partially. The question, if we can do it, why can't they, is turned on its head. It becomes, if they can do all this, how can we be sure of anything we see at all? The line between reality and simulation, between observation and manipulation, is completely blurred. We may not be just passive observers in this drama. We may not be the only ones using these technologies. What if someone has been using them against us for a long time? What if everything we know about Atlas is just a meticulously staged play, and its true nature and goals are so alien that our minds are simply incapable of grasping them? We are learning to create illusions in the sky, but what if we ourselves are living inside one? The philosophical abyss we've peered into is cold and bottomless, the dark forest, the galactic zoo, an incomprehensible superintelligence. Any of these realities means the end of our world as we knew it. But reflections, no matter how deep, remain in the realm of the abstract. To bring our investigation back to the firm ground of facts, we must shift our gaze from the past to the future, to a concrete, tangible, predictable event that is inexorably approaching and will become the next moment of truth in this cosmic drama. We need to talk about the Hera mission. At first glance, this event seems completely unrelated to our story. Hera is a European Space Agency, ESA mission, the second part of a grand planetary defense experiment. The first part, NASA's DART, Double Asteroid Redirection Test, mission, already took place in September 2022. A kamikaze spacecraft the size of a vending machine slammed into the small asteroid Dimorphos, which orbits the larger asteroid Didymos at a speed of 22,000 kilometers per hour, nearly 14,000 mathrami. The goal was simple and brilliant: to test if we could change an asteroid's orbit with a kinetic impact. The experiment was a resounding success. Dimorphos' orbit changed even more than the most optimistic models predicted. For the first time in history, humanity proved it could alter the trajectory of celestial bodies. Now, Hera takes the stage. Its launch is scheduled for October 2024. Its task is to arrive at the Didymos-Dimorphos system in late 2026 and conduct a detailed crime scene investigation. The spacecraft will study the crater left by the DOT impact, precisely measure the mass and composition of Dimorphos, and analyze the ejected material. The official goal is to gather priceless data that will allow us to more effectively deflect asteroids that genuinely threaten Earth in the future. It is a noble, important, and completely transparent scientific mission. At least, that's the official story. But in a world where nothing is what it seems, we must ask the question, what if that's not the whole truth? What if studying the aftermath of the DART impact is just a convenient and logical cover for another, unspoken, and far more important objective? To see this objective, we need to look at the map of the solar system again. Not a static one, but a dynamic one, where all objects are in constant motion. And then we will discover an incredible, almost impossible coincidence. In late 2026, during the very weeks when Hera is scheduled to arrive at the asteroid Didymos, the trajectory of this asteroid will intersect with the orbit of 3I Atlas. They will be in the same sector of space, just a few million kilometers apart. On a cosmic scale, that's not even point-blank range. It's a touch. The probability of such a random triple rendezvous, a spacecraft from Earth, a binary asteroid, and an interstellar object, is so astronomically small that it can be safely considered zero. The orbital mechanics at ESA and NASA are the best in the world. They plan trajectories decades in advance with meter-level precision. They could not have been unaware of this coincidence. This means it was not an accident. It was planned. The Hera mission was designed to be in the right place at the right time. Its true, unspoken target may not be Didymos at all. Its true target is Atlas. This is a brilliant move, worthy of the best strategists. Sending a probe directly to Atlas would have been impossible. It would have immediately raised questions from the entire global scientific community and thousands of amateur astronomers tracking spacecraft trajectories. It would have been tantamount to admitting there is something anomalous about this object. But sending a probe to Didymos is perfectly logical and justified as part of a planetary defense program. It's the perfect cover. Hera is flying to its official target, but along the way, it gets a unique opportunity to observe Atlas from close range, perhaps even to perform a short, unplanned flyby. What do they hope to see there? The answer lies in the spacecraft's payload. Aboard Hera, in addition to standard cameras and spectrometers, are two unique instruments. The first is the PALT, Planetary Altimeter, LiDAR. This is a laser altimeter that will scan the surface of Dimorphos, creating a 3D map of it with incredible precision. But the same LiDAR can also be used for another purpose, to scan for invisible or semi-transparent structures. What if they plan to use PALT to probe the very field that, according to our hypothesis, surrounds Atlas? To try to map that same ghostly triangular structure that we on Earth can only see for hundredths of a second? The second, even more interesting instrument, is two miniature satellites, so-called CubeSats. One of them, Juventus, carries a low-frequency radar capable of seeing through the asteroid to study its internal structure. Now imagine that this radar is pointed not at Dimorphos, but at Atlas. This is their chance to look under the hood, to see what's hidden beneath its icy, osmium-reinforced shell. Is it solid? Or are there cavities inside? Structures? Mechanisms? This will be the first ever act of direct, active sensing of a suspected extraterrestrial artifact. And the system is preparing for this moment. They know this event will be the point of no return. The data Hera sends back could either definitively confirm their worst fears, or conversely, disprove everything. And they will, most likely, try to control this information once again. But here, an even more disturbing thought arises. What if the game is not one-sided? What if Atlas also knows about Hera's arrival? If it's capable of controlled propulsion and possesses super technology, tracking a small, noisy terrestrial spacecraft would be no trouble for it. And in that case, Its own orbit, which brought it to a rendezvous with Didymos and Hera, is also no accident. It's a trap. It's not just waiting. It's luring our messenger to it. Why? Perhaps to study it, to capture it, to take it apart and understand our level of technological development. In this case, Hera turns from hunter to prey, a moth to a flame. Or maybe its intentions are even more complex. Recall our hypothesis that Atlas is the key, and Psyche is the lock. What if, to awaken Psyche, it's missing some component? Some element or signal that doesn't exist in the asteroid belt? What if this component is on board Hera? For example, in its radioisotope power source, or in the software code of its control system, and Atlas is simply waiting for delivery. We, unknowingly, are bringing it the final piece needed to start some ancient, incomprehensible mechanism. The countdown has already begun. October 2024, the launch of Hera. Late 2026, the triple rendezvous. These dates are not just points on a calendar. They are windows of opportunity. Windows we will be watching with bated breath, because it is then that much will be decided. And the system understands this. Their recent activity, their sudden transparency, is not just a diversion, but also a preparation of public opinion. They are slowly turning up the heat, accustoming us to the idea of non-human intelligence, so that when, or if, something happens to Hera, they can say, "We warned you. They exist, and they're not always friendly." This would give them carte blanche for any further actions, no matter how radical. They are preparing the ground not just for a scientific discovery, but for a possible crisis. The Hera mission is officially designed to study asteroids, but its true, unspoken purpose may be entirely different. It could become either our greatest triumph, the first contact with an extraterrestrial artifact, or our greatest tragedy. The moment we realize we ventured too far into the dark forest and awakened something that should have been left undisturbed, and we have only 2 years to prepare for this moment. 2 years to watch the system's every move and try to understand what game they're really playing. The watch continues. We speak of the system as a faceless, monolithic Goliath. We speak of the anomaly as an incomprehensible cosmic force. But in this informational drama, unfolding on a planetary scale, there is a third party, the one that will never be written about in official reports and press releases. They are the Seekers, a decentralized global army of Davids, armed not with a sling and a stone, but with telescopes, computers, and the most powerful weapon of all, unrelenting human curiosity. These are the very people who find the cracks in the walls of official stories, notice the ghosts in the archives, and hear the whispers in the digital noise. To truly understand the depth of this conflict, we must shift our focus from the global to the personal for a moment. We must tell the stories of these people, understand their motivations, see what they have to face in their lonely hunt for the truth. Because their struggle is not just an intellectual exercise, it is an act of civil courage in a world that increasingly strives to control knowledge. Let's return to the Arizona desert, to Stephen Burns's homemade observatory. After he anonymously published his data on the triangular signature of Atlas, his life changed. First came a wave of recognition in the narrow circles of independent researchers. His work was hailed as a benchmark for amateur astronomy. His methodology became a model to emulate. On private forums, he became a legend, the oracle who dared to show what the system tried to hide. But with fame came a shadow. A few weeks after publishing his findings, Burns began to notice strange things. His home internet connection became intermittent. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, his security camera system would record low-flying, unmarked drones passing over his property. One morning, leaving his house, he found a perfectly outlined boot print military style, in the sand next to his car, which definitely hadn't been there the day before. These were subtle, almost imperceptible jabs. Not direct threats, but hints. A way of saying, we know who you are, we know where you are, we are watching you. This is a classic tactic of psychological pressure, designed not to scare someone to death, but to make them doubt themselves, their sanity, to make them feel paranoid. For many, this would have been enough to back down, delete their data, and return to a quiet, peaceful retirement. But Burns was cut from a different cloth. Decades as an engineer had taught him one thing. If a system is malfunctioning, it means it's under external stress. And the stronger the malfunctions, the more important what you're trying to measure is. These clumsy attempts at intimidation became not a deterrent for him, but the ultimate confirmation that he was right. They are afraid, which means he's on the right track. Instead of falling silent, he did the opposite. He spent his savings on upgrading the Sentinel. He installed more secure communication channels, encrypted all his archives, and most importantly, created a dead man's switch system. He gave full copies of his raw data and analysis to several trusted individuals in different countries, with instructions to publish everything openly if anything happened to him, or if he failed to make contact for 72 hours. He turned himself from a single target into a distributed information bomb. This was his answer to the system. Quiet, engineered, but full of ice-cold determination. Now let's cross the ocean to a small apartment on the outskirts of Munich, home to the astrophysics student known by the handle Stellar Keeper. Let's call him Klaus. It was he who first asked that simple, killer question on the forum about the lack of a flare from Atlas. Klaus represents a new generation of seekers. He doesn't build telescopes. His weapon is code. He is a virtuoso with the Python programming language and machine learning methods. He can write a script that sifts through terabytes of public astronomical data overnight, finds the necessary objects, and plots light curves with surgical precision. It was his work that definitively buried JPL's outgassing theory. But unlike Burns, Klaus faced a different, more insidious form of pressure. Not physical intimidation, but academic ostracism. When he tried to present the results of his analysis at a student science conference, his submission was rejected without explanation. His academic advisor, initially thrilled with his student's work, suddenly began to avoid him, and when asked directly, would reply that it's too speculative a topic that could damage his future career. In the academic world, where reputation and publications in peer-reviewed journals are everything, such a soft boycott is tantamount to professional death. The system here acted not through men in black helicopters, but through its academic institutions, through unwritten rules, through professors' fear of losing grants, through the editorial policies of scientific journals that would never publish an article contradicting the official line from NASA or ESA. Klaus wasn't intimidated. He was simply being erased from the future of science. He was offered a choice. Either you play by our rules, research safe topics, and build a career, or you keep digging where you shouldn't and remain a pariah whose work no one will ever take seriously. And again, for many, this would have been the end. But Klaus found his answer. He realized that the old, hierarchical model of science, based on the authority of institutions, was dying. The future belongs to open, decentralized, citizen science. He and a few like-minded individuals from different countries created an online platform, a kind of archive for forbidden topics, a place where any independent researcher can publish their work, their data, their code, and where that work is judged not by the author's name or the prestige of their university, but solely by the quality of the analysis itself. It was their declaration of independence. They were creating a parallel academic reality, free from censorship and fear. The stories of Stephen and Klaus are just two examples. But around the world, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of such people. The female programmer from Brazil who spent months manually checking the Psyche archive manifests and was the first to find the missing files. The group of amateur radio operators in Australia who combined their homemade antennas into a single virtual radio telescope and are now trying to catch any anomalous signals coming from Atlas, bypassing the official deep space network. The former NSA analyst who, in retirement, entertains himself by looking for anomalies in satellite data traffic and was the first to notice strange, encrypted packets that Hera was exchanging with some unknown ground control center not belonging to ESA. They are all different people, with different backgrounds, speaking different languages. But they are united by one thing. They are humanity's immune system. They are the cells that react to the invasion of lies, to the virus of concealment. They prove that in an era of total control and information manipulation, the spirit of independent truth-seeking cannot be destroyed. It may be driven underground into anonymous forums, into encrypted chats, but it will live on. And these people are the true heroes of our story. Not the politicians making grand statements in Congress, not the scientists in white coats obediently following the party line, but the lone Davids who, from the shadows of their basements and observatories, continue to aim for the head of the informational Goliath. Their work did not go unnoticed, but shortly after publishing their findings, many of them, like Chris Green, began receiving strange messages. Their forum accounts were hacked. Their computers were subjected to phishing attacks. Strange, unpleasant coincidences began to occur in their personal lives. The system realized it was dealing not with a handful of cranks, but with an organized, effective, and dangerous force. And it began to strike back. The invisible war for truth had entered a new, hot phase, and its outcome will decide not only the fate of the Three-Eye Atlas mystery, but the future of the very idea of free knowledge on our planet. The war for truth, waged by the Seekers, forced the system to shift from passive concealment to active countermeasures. But the harder it pushed, the fiercer the resistance became. This cycle of escalation has brought us to a point where we need to step back and look at the whole picture. We must return to the beginning, to the very first event that started it all, to what we called the trickster event. But now we will return to it not with naive bewilderment, but with the wealth of knowledge accumulated throughout our investigation. We will look at it in light of the missing Psyche files, the triangular signature, the unspoken objective of the Hera mission. And then, what initially seemed to us merely a diversionary tactic, a smokescreen, will appear in its true, much deeper, and more sinister light. The original mystery takes on a new, shocking meaning. And only now are we beginning to understand. Remember where we started? With the sensational hearings in Congress. With David Grusch talking about non-human biologics. We hypothesized that this was a brilliant move by the system to divert attention. To throw the crowd a bone in the form of old Roswell stories so that no one would look at Atlas, approaching right now. This hypothesis was logical, but as we now understand, incomplete. It viewed the hearings merely as informational noise. But what if it wasn't noise? What if it was a signal? A carefully calibrated, multi-layered signal intended for different audiences. For us, the general public, it was indeed a show, a psychological inoculation. But there was another, far more important audience to whom this message was addressed, and that audience was not on Earth. Let's analyze the terminology used by Grusch and subsequently adopted by all officials. Non-human biologics. Why this particular phrase? Why not alien bodies or extraterrestrial remains? At first glance, it's just bureaucratic jargon, an attempt to avoid overly sensational language. But in the world of intelligence and diplomacy, every word matters. Biologics is a term that implies not just a living organism, but a hybrid of the living and the artificial. It describes not just a creature, but a product of engineering. This word perfectly, with chilling accuracy, describes what we hypothesize 3i Atlas to be: a biomechanical entity. A coincidence? Or was the system, using Grusch as its mouthpiece, sending a signal? A signal that both prepared us for the nature of the coming contact, and more importantly, told Atlas itself, "We know what you are. We have encountered similar technologies before. We are not as primitive as you think." Recall the context. The hearings began immediately after Atlas performed its maneuver and demonstrated its capabilities. Perhaps the system perceived this maneuver not just as a parking maneuver, but as a demonstration of force, a challenge. And the congressional hearings were their response. It was not just an operation to divert attention, it was the first move in a highly complex game of interstellar poker. They laid one of their cards on the table, knowledge of previous contacts, to see the opponent's reaction. It was an attempt to establish an informal communication channel using the public sphere as a transmitter. They couldn't send a direct radio message to Atlas. That would be too obvious and dangerous. But they could stage a play for the whole world, knowing that the intended recipient was watching and would understand the hidden meaning. What seemed like chaos and panic now looks like a perfectly planned diplomatic or military overture. But there is an even deeper layer. Let's return to the very first trickster event, which we mentioned only in passing, to what happened on the same day and hour as the Atlas maneuver. The glitch on Psyche. We have convincingly shown that it was not a glitch, but the result of an action by Atlas. We found the ghost of the deleted files. But we missed one crucial detail. Where exactly on Earth did this glitch occur? Which control center lost contact with the spacecraft? It wasn't Houston or Moscow. It was NASA's Deep Space Network, DSN, a global system of 3 stations located in California, Spain, and Australia. The loss of signal from Psyche was recorded by all 3 stations simultaneously. But at the same time, another event occurred, which was barely reported in the press, because it was considered a minor technical incident. In the very same minute, at 03:12 UTC on May 23rd, a massive outage occurred at one of the world's largest cloud providers, Amazon Web Services, AWS, specifically in its most important and busiest region, US East 1, located in Northern Virginia. For several hours, thousands of websites, online services, and corporate networks around the world went down. The official cause was cited as a failure in the DNS query distribution system. A boring technical problem. Nothing to see here. But this is where it gets really strange. The US East 1 region is not just a collection of servers. It is the digital heart of the US government and intelligence community. It is there, on special isolated GovCloud servers, that the CIA, NSA, Pentagon, and of course, NASA, store and process their data, including the raw telemetry streams from the DSN. That is, at the very moment Atlas was affecting Psyche in deep space, an attack occurred on Earth on the very digital hub where the data from Psyche was supposed to be received. A coincidence? The probability of this is even lower than that of Hera's triple rendezvous. It was a coordinated, 2-pronged attack, one part physical, in space, aimed at the spacecraft itself. The second part digital, on Earth, aimed at the data reception and storage infrastructure. This explains why the files were not just missing, but were deleted so crudely and hastily. Perhaps the system didn't even manage to receive them in full. The attack on AWS was not just a coincidence. It was a cover. It created digital chaos, a perfect smokescreen to hide the main event, the targeted destruction or interception of key evidence. And now, we can put all the pieces of the puzzle together and see the final, shocking picture. What we initially took for two independent events, the Atlas maneuver and the congressional hearings, was actually one and the same. It was an act of contact consisting of three phases. Phase 1, demonstration. Atlas performs its maneuver and simultaneously launches a double strike on Psyche and AWS, showcasing its capabilities in both the physical and digital realms. This was not an attack, but the presentation of a business card. The message was clear. I am here. I see you. I can reach you anywhere, from the asteroid belt to your most secure servers. Phase 2, response. The system, realizing the scale of the threat and the opponent's level of technology, responds in the only way available to it, through public hearings. They say, "We understood your message. We're not to be trifled with either. We know about you and your kind. We are ready for dialogue, or for something more." Phase 3, waiting. We are now in this phase. Both sides have made their moves. Atlas has taken a wait-and-see position in its new orbit. The system is preparing its next move, the Hera mission, which will either continue the dialogue or conduct reconnaissance in force. And all of us, all of humanity, are not just spectators, but hostages in this ice-cold, silent duel between two titans. This discovery changes everything. The AWS outage was not just a coincidence. It was a cover. And what they were hiding wasn't on the servers. It was in the signal itself. Perhaps in those 15 minutes when communication with Psyche was lost, the spacecraft wasn't just silent. Perhaps Atlas used it as a relay to transmit a message to Earth. A message that was so alien, so information-dense, or so dangerous that the system preferred to crash half the internet and physically destroy all traces of its reception, just so it wouldn't become public knowledge. We thought they were hiding the truth about the past from us, but in reality, they are hiding an ultimatum, received in the present, and all of world history now revolves around this invisible, unheard ultimatum. The picture has come together. Cold, symmetrical, terrifying in its logic. A duel between the anomaly and the system, beginning with a double strike on Psyche and AWS, continuing in a silent standoff, and preparing for a climax at the rendezvous point with Hera. We, the Seekers, have done titanic work. We have journeyed from simple disbelief in the official version to constructing a complex, multi-layered, and, we believe, the only correct model of what is happening. We feel an intellectual triumph. We have connected the dots. We have uncovered the conspiracy. We see the strings. We see the choreography. We see the puppeteers in the shadows. But what comes next? What comes after the epiphany? The answer is not relief. Not the joy of victory. It is a heavy, oppressive feeling that can only be described in two words: tragic knowledge. It is the realization that you now possess the truth. But this truth isolates you, makes you a stranger in a world that continues to live in blissful ignorance. It is a burden that must now be carried. Imagine this feeling. You go outside after spending days analyzing data, reading classified reports, constructing these complex chains, and you see the world living its normal life. People are rushing to work, laughing in cafes, discussing the latest political news or gas prices. Their worries, their joys, their fears, they all seem so small now, so insignificant. Because you know that above their heads, in a cold, perfect orbit, a biomechanical entity is rotating, playing a game with the world's governments where the stakes are the very future of humanity. You know that the most important news isn't broadcast on television. The most decisive battles are fought in the silence of data centers, and the most crucial words are never spoken aloud. You look at the bright blue sky, and it no longer seems like a symbol of peace and tranquility. Now it's a veil a screen behind which the real drama is unfolding. This is the isolation born of knowledge. You can no longer truly share the worries and anxieties of those around you. You're separated from them by an invisible wall. You see what they do not see, and this knowledge becomes your prison. With isolation comes responsibility. If you know, you can't just stay silent. You feel an almost physical need to shout, to tell, to warn. You try to share your discovery with friends, with family. You show them the graphs, the diagrams, the timeline of events. You passionately explain the synchronicity, the missing files, the unspoken objective of Hera. And in return, you see a polite smile, a condescending nod. At best, they'll think you're an eccentric enthusiast. At worst, a paranoid who's caught the latest conspiracy virus. They say, "Yeah, that's interesting. But you know, it's all just theories. There's probably a simple explanation." They cannot and will not believe. Not because they are stupid, but because their consciousness is protected by a powerful psychological barrier, the craving for normalcy. To admit you are right means admitting that the world they live in is a fragile illusion, that the forces shaping their destiny are beyond their comprehension and control. It's too terrifying, and the human psyche instinctively rejects such horror. And then you realize that your knowledge is not only a burden, but also a curse. You see the truth, but you are powerless to make others see it. You are doomed to watch the world continue its carefree dance on the edge of the abyss. This tragic knowledge also gives rise to a new, deeper level of paranoia. You start seeing traces of the system everywhere, not just in global events, but in the little things. A sudden change in YouTube's algorithm that starts deprioritizing videos on dangerous topics. An article in a prestigious scientific journal that, with particular sarcasm, mocks amateurs looking for aliens in every bit of noise on an image. Trolls in the comments who, with unnatural coordination and repetitive arguments, attack any attempt at serious discussion. You can no longer be sure what is real and what is part of the information war. Is this commenter just a skeptic, or are they on the payroll of some public opinion management agency? Is this scientific takedown a genuine misconception, or a commissioned article designed to discredit inconvenient facts? The world loses its innocence. It becomes a battlefield where every word, every image, every like is a shot in an invisible war for reality. And you, as a seeker, are on the front lines, without armor and without support. But the hardest part of this knowledge is the realization of your own powerlessness. We, the seekers, are Davids. We can find Goliath's weak spot. We might even land a direct hit with our stone, publish irrefutable data, expose a lie. But in the 21st century, Goliath doesn't die from a single blow. He simply pretends not to have noticed. The system possesses an absolute weapon against which any truth is powerless, the ability to ignore. Your exposés might make noise in niche circles, on alternative platforms, in Telegram channels, but they will never make it to primetime news. Officials will never grace them with a comment. The scientific establishment will never take them seriously. They will simply create a zone of silence around you. And in that deafening silence, your truth, however loud, will simply drown. We can see the strings. We can see the choreography. But we cannot stop the play. We are merely spectators in the front row who have figured out the director's intent but are powerless to change anything, while the rest of the audience continues to applaud, not understanding that the finale of this play may be tragic for everyone. And so, left alone with this knowledge, tragic, isolating, paranoid, we ask ourselves the ultimate question, the one that stands at the end of any long and torturous investigation. Now that we know, what do we do with this knowledge? Hide it and try to return to a normal life, to forget everything like a bad dream? That would be the easiest thing to do. but it would be a betrayal of ourselves and the truth we fought for. Or do we continue to fight, to shout, to publish, even if it feels like no one is listening? Even if it means becoming an outcast, a madman in the eyes of society? It is a lonely and thankless path, but it is the only path we have left. Because knowledge is not only a burden, it is also a duty. The duty to bear witness. The duty to preserve the memory of what really happened, even if the whole world decides to forget it. We are the guardians of this tragic knowledge, and we will continue the watch. We will monitor Hera. We will analyze every bit of information. We will be ready for the next move in this great and terrible game. We see the strings. We see the choreography. But the puppeteer remains in the shadows. And the most terrifying question is not, what happens next? But are we next on his stage? Our knowledge does not give us power. It only gives us a clearer understanding of our fragility. And in this fragility, perhaps, lies our only, final dignity. We stand at the finale of our investigation, but not at the end of the story. We have navigated the labyrinth of lies, pieced together the fragments of truth, and peered into a technological and philosophical abyss. We carry the heavy burden of tragic knowledge. And now, looking back on the path we've traveled, we must draw a conclusion. Not to put a period on it. There can be no periods in this story. But to once again, from the height of all we have learned, outline the contours of the new, strange, and unsettling reality we find ourselves in. We must ask the central question of our investigation again, but now on a completely different, deeper level. We started with a simple one. Were the congressional hearings a cover for the arrival of 3I Atlas? Now, at the end of the road, that question seems naive, almost childish. Because we have understood that one is not a cover for the other. They are parts of a single, monumental process. A process that can be called the contact protocol. Let's walk through the key nodes of our map one last time. It all began not in 2023, but much earlier. 1977, the WOW signal. The first, barely perceptible test. Some agency in space throws a test stone in our direction, marking it with its triangular signature and watches the reaction. We hear it, but we don't understand. We record it as an anomaly. Test passed, but with a low score. 2017, Oumuamua. The second, more overt test. A physical object with the same signature passes through our system, exhibiting anomalous behavior. This time, the system on Earth reacts. It understands that this is no longer a coincidence and initiates the first, gentlest phase of the protocol, a controlled leak of old UFO data. This is an attempt to begin a slow acclimatization of society while simultaneously signaling to the observers, "We've noticed you." Test passed with a satisfactory grade. And finally, 2023, 3I Atlas, the final exam. The object doesn't just fly by, it stays. It demonstrates its technology by launching a precision strike on Psyche and AWS. This is no longer a test, it is an ultimatum. And the system, realizing that time has run out, launches the active phase of the protocol. A massive information operation in the form of congressional hearings. Its purpose is threefold. For us, psychological preparation and distraction. For themselves, buying time to analyze and prepare a response in the form of the Hera mission. And for Atlas, a signal of readiness for the next stage. What we are witnessing is not a conspiracy of concealment. It is a carefully orchestrated, agonizingly slow dance between two civilizations, separated by a developmental chasm. A dance where every step, every movement, every pause is filled with meaning. They cannot speak to us directly because, as we've realized, it could destroy us. We cannot speak to them because we don't know their language or their rules, so they communicate through actions. They show us a maneuver. We answer with a political spectacle. They wait. We send a probe. This is the protocol. A first contact spread out over 50 years, unfolding not in loud declarations, but in the silence of space, in lines of code, in orbital calculations. This is the drama of information in its purest form, and we, the Seekers, have, by accident or design, become its first audience members to be able to read the subtitles. But knowing the protocol doesn't answer the main question. What is its ultimate goal? Where does this dance lead? Here we once again enter the territory of speculation, but speculation based on all the logic we have gathered. If Atlas is the key and Psyche is the lock, then what lies behind that door? Perhaps it is a repository of knowledge left by an ancient progenitor civilization. A library meant to be opened only when a younger race, us, reaches a certain level of development, proving its ability to travel to the asteroid belt. In this almost utopian scenario, Atlas is our mentor, and the system is an overly cautious guardian, afraid that we won't be able to handle the knowledge we receive. But another, much darker possibility exists. What if Psyche is not a library, but a weapon? An ancient, dormant planetary defense system left here billions of years ago to protect against some third, even more formidable power. And Atlas has arrived to activate it because that threat is approaching again. In this scenario, we are not students. We are merely inhabitants of a house on whose roof a shootout between two gods is about to begin. And the system is not trying to hide the truth from us, but to conduct a quiet evacuation without causing a panic. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is clear. We are living in the most important time in human history. We are the generation of contact. Even if this contact remains silent, shadowy, invisible to most, the very fact that the game has begun changes everything. Our science, our politics, our religion, our sense of self, all will now be viewed through the prism of this new knowledge. And our task, the task of the Seekers, becomes more important than ever. We can no longer be just observers. We must become chroniclers. We must continue to gather data, to analyze, to connect the dots. We must create an alternative, truthful chronicle of these events, so that when the time comes, and the system can no longer hide the truth, humanity will have a source untainted by lies and manipulation. We are the keepers of the memory of this strange, frightening, and great time. Our investigation is complete, but the watch is never ending. The countdown to Hera's arrival continues. We will monitor its every move. We will analyze every bit of telemetry that leaks into the public domain. We will search for new triangular signatures in the sky. We will listen to the silence, trying to catch echoes of the great game being played above our heads. We urge you not to take our word for it. We urge you to verify, to ask questions, to not trust simple answers, neither ours nor theirs. Become a seeker, because in this new reality, the only truly valuable currency is critical thinking and an independent perspective. The truth is out there, but it will not fall into our laps from the sky. It will have to be fought for, and that fight is just beginning. Keep watching, keep questioning, and remember, what they aren't telling you is always more important than what they are showing you.